This morning we continue our At the Movie series. And this morning what's playing is Toy Story 5. Now it's crazy to think that Toy Story has spanned across 3 decades. And so if you're 30 years old, again, Toy Story has been around as long as you have. It's crazy to think that Toy Story, 3 of the Toy Stories, 3 of the 5, sit at the top 50 of the highest grossing movies. It sits, as a franchise, it sits at number 18 of the highest grossing film franchise. And the amazing thing about Toy Story, one of my favorite things about Toy Story is that there's not very many movies where the sequels match or exceed the original while maintaining a cohesive story that grows and develops with each film. Toy Story is a rare case where, again, each of the sequel is on par, maybe better than the other. And so, again, Toy Story has just been such a fun movie series over the last 30 years that's existed. Now, throughout all the Toy Stories, part 1 through 5, one of the core themes that we find in the movies is purpose. Woody, Buzz, Jessie, all the toys, they have a purpose of being the best toys that they can be for their kids. But as the series progresses, we know that their kid gets older and they continually face the looming threat of becoming obsolete, becoming irrelevant. If we go back to the very first Toy Story, Toy Story 1, Woody's purpose is to be Andy's favorite toy. Andy's his kid. But then when Buzz threatens position, Woody becomes jealous. He eventually realizes in the end that, again, friendship is better, and so he doesn't have to ward off Buzz. They both can be Andy's favorite toy. In Toy Story 2, Woody wrestles between choosing a finite purpose or more of an infinite purpose. Does he choose the finite purpose where he remains Andy's favorite toy, knowing that Andy's going to grow up at one point and it's going to leave him being forgotten? Or does he choose a more infinite purpose where he becomes a collector's item, but he's admired from afar behind a glass case? He struggles with that purpose. In Toy Story 3, a grown-up Andy no longer needs his toys, and the toys fear of being useless, being obsolete. But throughout the movie, they realize that their purpose doesn't end with Andy. When they're donated to Bonnie, they realize that they can bring joy to their new owner. Toy Story 4, Woody is no longer the favorite toy, something that he has been for the last 3 films, but finally in part 4, he's no longer the favorite toy, causing him to wrestle with his own purpose. For all his life, he's existed to make a kid happy. But what happens when his kid isn't happy with him anymore, doesn't care for him? He realizes that his purpose can evolve beyond one specific role, and so he chooses then to live out his purpose by helping lost toys connect with kids so that others can experience that happiness. And then in Toy Story 5, the toys face the threatening reality of becoming obsolete when their new kid, Bonnie, is given a tablet. In case you haven't seen the movie, I've got the trailer here for us, and so let's check out the trailer because it does a great job of capturing this theme. So while the toys in Toy Story constantly face an existential crisis, they always are facing existential. I can't speak. Existential crisis. I think you guys understand what I mean, right? They're always facing this crisis of what is my purpose. Trying to figure out what their fundamental reason to exist is. Thing is, we don't. As believers, we don't face that crisis. In fact, our purpose is very clear. When it comes to our purpose as believers is to love God, to love others. Our purpose as believers is to love God and to love others. And so we can love God by glorifying Him and enjoying Him. Glorifying God means we visibly show God and others how magnificent He is. And so, again, we obey His commands. We worship Him. We share His good news to others. Enjoying God means we find our ultimate satisfaction in Him. We treat Him as our greatest treasure. We treat Him as our primary source of joy by spending time in prayer or reading the Bible. That's what it means to love God, glorify Him, and enjoy Him. When it comes to loving others, what does that mean? It means that we care for others by sacrificing what we have for their needs. It means we love others unconditionally, not expecting anything in return. It means we serve them with a mindset of seeing them better than ourselves. There are so many other ways we can do this, but one specific way that I want us to look at this morning comes from the Bible, instructs us how to live this out, and this is found in Psalms chapter 78, verses 1 through 8. This is what it says. You can follow along in your Bible or on the screen. My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things from of old, things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, and the wonders He has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which He commanded our ancestors to teach their children. So the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget His deeds, but would keep His commands. They would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation, whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to Him. Now, I've shared this verse in the past regarding our value of entrusting the next generation, but this morning, I want to share it in light of what it means to live out our purpose of loving God and loving others. And there's moments where, the closest thing that comes to mind is playing, if you play video games and you're a bit of a completionist and you play those games where like there's like the main quest and there's like 500 other side quests. I'm the type that likes to just grind out and try to complete all the side quests and get that 100% mark. And so in studying Psalm 78, which again has been a verse I've been using for our value of entrusting next generation, there's this beautiful moment where it felt like, again, you're just grinding out Psalm 78 and there's this beautiful side quest in it that has never been apparent. And so the beautiful thing about Scripture is that there's just nuggets everywhere for you to find. And so this morning we're going to be in Psalm 78 to understand what it means to love God and love others. The psalmist here specifically instructs us that we can love God and love others by telling the next generation about God's actions, God's powers, the wonders that He's done for us. We are to tell them to our next children so that they would know who God is and that they would tell the next generation so that the next generation would know and that they would tell even children yet to be born so that they too would put their trust in God, that they would keep His commands. And what's God's commands? To love God and to love others, right? To glorify Him, to enjoy Him too. But unfortunately, that wasn't always the case. At the very end of verse 8, the psalmist hints at us hints at us and warns us that their ancestors weren't like this. Their ancestors were stubborn, they were rebellious, they were unloyal, they were unfaithful to God. And so they didn't tell the next generation. In fact, if we read all of Psalm 78, there's 72 verses, these four traits of stubbornness, rebellion, being unloyal, being unfaithful, they're repeated multiple times. Not just once, not just twice, multiple times. Being stubborn, being rebellious, being unloyal, being unfaithful point to one thing, and that's selfishness. That it's all about me. And at the core of sin, every sin issue that we have is selfishness, all about me. Sin always looks at me instead of God. And one of the particular people groups that the psalmist specifically highlights in pointing this out are the men of Ephraim. And so if we continue to read in Psalm 78, verses 9 to 22, this is how the psalmist describes them. The men of Ephraim, though armed with bows, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant and refused to live by his law. They forgot what he had done, the wonders he had shown them. He did miracles in the sight of their ancestors in the land of Egypt, in the region of Zon. He divided the sea and led them through. He made the waters stand up like a wall. He guided them with the cloud by day and the light from the fire all night. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them water as abundant as the seas. He brought streams out of a rocky crag and made water flow down like rivers. But they continued to sin against him, rebelling in the wilderness against the Most High. They willfully put God to the test by demanding the food they craved. They spoke against God. They said, "Can God really spread a table in the wilderness?" True, he struck the rock and water gushed out. Streams flowed abundantly. But can he also give us bread? Can he supply meat for his people? When the Lord heard them, he was furious. His fire broke out against Jacob, and his wrath rose against Israel, for they did not believe in God or trust in his deliverance. Let me give you a little bit more background information on who the men of Ephraim were. As we find out in the very first verse, in verse 9 at least, that they were a powerful tribe. They were the warriors. They were the protectors who protected all of Israel. But like many of the Israelites, they fell into idolatry and disobeyed God. Ironically, the men of Ephraim, they were descendants of Joseph, someone who was very faithful to God. And I'll give you a quick history of who Joseph is. You can read all about him in the Genesis, but here are some highlights of who Joseph is in a nutshell. Joseph had 12 brothers, and he was the youngest of the 12. He was also the favorite son of his father, Jacob. Jacob's father was Isaac. Isaac's father was Abraham. All of his brothers were so jealous of him that they decided to kill Joseph. But in the end, they opted to sell him into slavery. Joseph ends up being a slave in Egypt, and as tragic as that was, he continued to stay faithful to God. So God blessed him with favor from Pharaoh, and then this results in Joseph then becoming second in command over Egypt. After Pharaoh was Joseph. Long story short, there was a famine across all the land. Joseph's brothers eventually traveled to Egypt to buy food. They eventually reunite with Joseph in Egypt, not knowing that Joseph is still alive. When Joseph finally reveals who he is, Joseph forgives them, invites them to come live with them, and then that's the story. Eventually, though, Joseph and his brothers, their father Jacob, passes away. But before Jacob passes away, he blesses each of his sons with a blessing. Unfortunately, Jacob's oldest son, Reuben, is stripped of the honor and the right of being firstborn. In many of our cultures, being the firstborn comes with a big weight and a big honor. Same thing is true in biblical times too. Reuben, being the oldest, again, had a lot of honor and a lot of responsibility. But because of his unfaithfulness, because of his lack of taking any action, Reuben is stripped of his honor and his right of being the firstborn. Instead, that blessing is given to Jacob's youngest, Joseph. And that blessing is also given to Joseph's two younger sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Specifically, Ephraim receiving this firstborn blessing that Reuben was supposed to receive. But again, instead, Ephraim receives it, making him now the prominent tribe of Israel. But even though they were Jacob's favorite, and they received the special blessing of the firstborn, the men of Ephraim didn't keep God's covenant and refused to live by his law. And as a result, if we read later on in Psalm 78, specifically verses 67 and verses 68, the psalmist informs us that God did not choose the tribe of Ephraim to be the honorable tribe, but instead God chooses the tribe of Judah to lead. Judah was one of the 12 brothers. Judah was the fourth son. Judah was given the highest blessing. Now, if you're a middle child, you know well that you're forgotten. You get lost because the oldest gets all the attention, the youngest gets all the attention, the middle child, they get lost in the mix. But it is Judah, the fourth son, who God chooses as the honorable tribe. Judah would lead, and here's why. If you go back to that same story of Joseph being sold into slavery, in Genesis 37, we find out that it was Judah who proposed the alternative idea to sell him into slavery instead of killing him. Judah was the one who proposed, again, an alternative. All 11 of them wanted to kill Joseph. But Reuben, the oldest, tried to intervene by having Joseph thrown into a cistern. Unfortunately, Reuben couldn't influence his brothers and didn't act on his conviction. And so although he suggested it, he didn't do anything to intervene. But we're told in Genesis 37, verse 26, that Judah, the fourth son, convinces his brothers to sell him instead of killing him. Although it's an evil deed to sell his brother, it reveals to us the beginning stages of a remorseful heart. A heart that's filled with regret. A heart that is going to change. Much later in life, like I mentioned, Judah and his brothers go to Egypt to buy food because there's a famine going on. Egypt has a surplus. And unknowingly, they run into their brother Joseph. But again, none of them recognize who he is. Joseph, on the other hand, recognizes them all and puts them through a test. In particular, Joseph stages one of the tests by hiding his silver cup in Benjamin's sack and then orders his men to search the sacks and arrest the one who stole it. After Joseph was sold into slavery, at that point he was the youngest. His brothers had lied to the father that he had died, and eventually Jacob had another son named Benjamin, and he became loved and cherished by Jacob. After the brothers leave, Joseph sends after the brothers get their food and leave, and again, Joseph has staged his whole cup thing by hiding the cup in Benjamin's sack. Joseph sends his men after them, and they find the silver cup in Benjamin's sack, and the consequence is slavery. Benjamin has to become Joseph's slave. But Judah, in this moment, does everything he can to protect Benjamin. He once did minimally to protect Joseph, but here he does everything he can to protect Benjamin. He sacrifices himself by offering to take Benjamin's place. He pleads with Joseph, again, unknowing that that's his brother Joseph. He pleads at this point, what he sees as the authority figure, hey, let me take Benjamin's place. Because if you take Benjamin to be your slave, that's going to break my father's heart so much that he's going to die. Judah, in trying to find a solution for all that he's done, all the mistakes he's made, confesses the guilt of selling Joseph into slavery. And he's willing to make every wrong right by sacrificing himself for Benjamin. And so in this moment, he chooses to live out a godly purpose because he demonstrates his love for God by doing what is right and his love for others by sacrificing himself for his brother Benjamin. And it was at this moment when Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers. He could no longer hold back after hearing Judah's confession and Judah's solution, and he reunites with his brothers. Now here's what's great about Judah choosing to live out his life with a godly purpose. Not only does he make wrongs right, but the impact of his decision to live life loving God and loving others results in an incredible legacy. Later on, when Jacob is about to pass away, like I mentioned earlier, he blesses his son. And this is Judah's blessing. We find it in Genesis 49. This is what Jacob says to Judah. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Again, Reuben is the oldest son, but he isn't blessed to rule over others. Joseph is the favorite, but he isn't blessed to rule over others. Joseph's son, Ephraim, receives a blessing of the firstborn, but even he isn't blessed to rule over others. It's Judah. Judah is blessed to rule over the others. It's Judah because Judah chose to live a life reflecting God's purpose, to love God and to love others. And as a result, he was chosen to rule over others. And from Judah eventually came King David. And from King David eventually came Jesus. So that's why we refer to Jesus as the Lion of Judah. Because Judah's willingness to live a life of reflecting God's purpose, of loving God and loving others, that Christ would descend from his lineage and become the King of Kings. And so living a godly purpose today impacts the generations tomorrow. Living a godly purpose today impacts the generations tomorrow. Psalm 78 assures us of this, but not Toy Story. I love Toy Story, but if I'm honest with you, I don't know if I can do another sequel. I don't know if I can do a part 6. The existential crisis that these toys face creates so much anxiety around me. I'm like, what is my purpose now? What am I supposed to do? Because I become attached to these characters. And it drives me nuts when they're trying to achieve their purpose and then a human shows up and they freeze and they just fall dead to the ground. But that's not the case for us. That's not the case for us. Our purpose as believers is very clear. To love God and to love others. And we can simply do that based on Psalm 78 by simply telling our children about the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and all the wonders that he has done. God has done something amazing in your life. Don't miss out on it. If you are a believer, God has already done something amazing in your life. He has taken you from being a sinner, being his enemy, and through Jesus Christ, now in believing him, he's taking you from being sinners and enemies to being his friends. When Christ died on the cross, he made it possible for us to become right with God through our faith. For some of us, we've made that decision to believe and to fully commit our lives to love God and to love others. That is the praiseworthy deed and the power and the wonders that he has done. So tell your children, tell any children, how you were once an enemy of God, but now you are a friend of God. You are a child of God. This is also a great reason why you should consider volunteering with the kids ministry, with the youth ministry, with the nursery team. You get to live out God's purpose by telling them the praiseworthy deeds that God has done in your life. Tell them about the moment when you made a decision to believe in Jesus. For some of us, we might not have made that decision yet, but you can. And it's not very difficult. In Romans chapter 10, verse 9, it says this: if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That you can make that decision to declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart with faith that Jesus was raised from the dead, that you can experience this praiseworthy deed in your life as well too. Again, in declaring that truth, you too will experience the deeds, the power, and the wonders of God. And so if you haven't declared this yet, may this be the day that you start making a decision or start seeing what God means to you. And you're ready to declare it with your mouth so that you can experience life change, so that you can tell it to your children, so that you can tell it to any children, so that they may believe and their children can believe too, so that the next generation can believe too, and the children who aren't even born yet can believe in God as well too, so that they, along with us, can serve our purpose that God has for us, to love him and to love others. Let's pray.